There's your Cassel. There's your Perry. We got a great game this week. Patriots, Browns. Both teams are 5-4, and I guarantee you what happens in this game is going to have an impact on who the wild card teams are in the AFC. But because the Patriots have been in pursuit of Odell Beckham Jr., and he's making decisions based upon elite teams with a chance to win, it's kind of brought to the forefront of my mind the Patriots as they're constructed right now at 5-4. Do we believe the Patriots are a receiver away from being a Super Bowl aspirant? Matt, do you think if they got OBJ, that would be a tipping point for their offense to be, holy crap, we can't deal with these guys?
I mean, it would help, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to be the major factor in whether or not they go deep in the playoffs. And the fact of the matter is, look, we don't know how long it would take a receiver like OBJ to get caught up to speed, not only on terminology, route recognitions, all the little nuances that go on in this offense. While it would be great if he could, but without the offseason, without time and reps in this system, it's hard to get a receiver caught up to speed. But if he can, yeah, he'd be a great guy to have out there for your one-on-one. You circle him, you say he's going to go win consistently. But again, it's a matter of time and whether or not he could get caught up to speed. So I don't think he's going to be the factor that just drives this team to the top.
Philly.
I don't think he's a missing piece either. And I think Matt brings up a really good point, and it reiterates something that I heard from Cleveland very recently, which is, when you're talking about picking up what the Patriots are putting down, what they expect in terms of route running and picking up the playbook, what I was told was Odell Beckham has really developed a reputation as a freelancer and not having a lot of detail when it comes to his routes. And I don't know how well that plays here in New England. Maybe you can flip a switch and make it work, Tom, but I don't know if receiver, and specifically this particular receiver, because I still have questions about how good he is. I don't think he's the missing piece.
That being the case, then we have to look at what we feel would be potentially the reason the Patriots season ends. And I think it's going to be later rather than sooner. I think this is a playoff team. But as we look at this developing team and we look at this Cleveland game and we feel that, hey, it's a pretty good team the Patriots put together. They're ahead of schedule, if not right on it. There's going to be a reason they're ushered out. And that's because they're not ready. They're not ready in the vein that they were throughout the last decade. So where are they not ready? In my estimation, I'm going to tell you what my belief is in the Achilles heel. It's two-tiered. It's the tackle position, the inability to week in, week out give protection. And it's also right underneath that, and it does have to do with OBJ. It's not having somebody on offense who the other team has to go, we're going to have to devote 1.5 people to that guy. Nobody can win dynamically one-on-one. They have 46 receptions so far for Jacoby Myers. Everybody else is around 20. Jacoby Myers is not an offensive centerpiece, in my estimation, talent-wise. You need somebody who has some of that breathtaking, oh my God, we have to send a bunch of people at him. But since you don't have that, you have to protect longer. The tackles can't protect longer. It's going to come down to when the Patriots season ends, it will be because they couldn't protect long enough to get guys open, and they scored 9 points. That's my feeling. Achilles heel, boys, jump in.
Yeah, I would say I like your pointing out the tackle position, because if you can't protect Mac Jones, it doesn't matter who's at receiver, because you're not going to be able to push it down the field all that often. Anyway, I'd also be looking at just their depth at corner. But Tom and Matt, you can't add a good player at corner at this point in the year. You can't add a good tackle at this point in the year. So that's why it is interesting. Even though I have questions about his ability at this point, it's interesting to at least talk about Odell Beckham, because he's available and he's there, and it's a premier position, and it might be a way to improve your team because there's just not that many avenues to do that at this point in time.
Right. And to me, again, this team, if you look at them from an offensive standpoint, I love the way that they run the ball. They run it with physicality. They've got 3 good backs that are running down, really 4 good backs, even with JJ Taylor. At the end of the day, though, there's been inconsistency in the pass game, and we've seen it from more so the last few weeks than we have in other weeks. Yes, the high completion percentage, a lot of easy throws here and there, but they struggle to get the ball down the field. And you talk about these teams that are like these, that are going to play a lot of cover one. Can you get open? Can you block long enough? Well, part of that too is you can you can manufacture ways to get guys open, whether it's stacks, whether it's bunches. And we used to do that a lot. Look, Deion Branch, David Givens, guys like that way back in the day, they went on to win Super Bowls and get open and do those things. But a lot of it was formationally based. You can set it up, you can create picks. And so the biggest strength of this team is being able to run the ball and then being able to set up play action. But they have to be more consistent, and they also have to start games faster, right? That's one of the Achilles heel to me, is how they've started games throughout the course of the year. They've been slow starters, and that's surprising to me, just based on the fact that you rep those plays all week long. You understand your starters going into a game. You understand what third down calls are going to be coming up early in the game, red zone calls. So they just have to find a way to get off to better starts, because all in all, if they can do that, then they're going to be more of a complete team.
We look at this game too. It's going to be interesting. A couple of points that Matt was referring to, the cover one stuff, the way these teams are built, the way they'll start. Phil has pointed it out a couple of times this week. The Browns aren't built to come from behind. The Patriots have done so because I think they're a resilient team. You know, they've been against both the Chargers and the Cowboys down, not big, but down, and had to come back and did so, eventually losing against Cowboys. But be that as it may, how do these two teams compare, Phil? And how does that cover one stuff look? Because basically, both of these teams are maniacal or very good pass rushers. The Patriots have been getting pressure with 4, able to play zone. And as a result, they're going to be able to make perhaps Cleveland a little bit more run heavy. The Patriots would probably love to be run heavy anyway, but Cleveland has such a good pass rush. I mean, there's a lot going on here. Put it that way. Help me out.
They both want to run the football. They've built their scheme and their identity around the running game. When you look at it, they run 13 personnel, 1 back, 3 tight ends, because they just want to cram it down your throat. They're paying their 2 guards as 2 of the top paid guards in football. And I think when we think of the modern game, we think of, okay, tackle, receiver, quarterback, you got to pay those positions offensively. They're paying their guards because that's who they are. They want to be able to run wide zone, Kevin Stefanski's from the Gary Kubiak system, but they also run a ton of power. 3/4 of their runs, they had an offensive lineman on the move last week against the Bengals, and they ran at will. So we know, Matt, that the Patriots want to do a lot of the same things. I just wonder if they'll be able to do it against the Browns, because this front is really good, as Tom mentioned. So how do you see the Patriots trying to attack this Browns defense?
Well, they've got a very physical front, right? And it starts with the 2 interior guys, Malik Jackson, Malik McDonald. They're 2 big physical guys, which allows those linebacking core to run over the top. And it's one of those systems that they're going to try to eat you up front and then let those linebackers flow over the top. They've got good defensive ends. Obviously, Myles Garrett is an absolute beast. And then when you look at them from the back end, they like to play more of a cover 4 shell, which is quarter, which means everybody, the corners and the safeties, are responsible for a quarter of the field. Now they disguise a little bit and they run a little bit of more rotation at times, but then when they do rotate down into the box with their strong safety, it's really 4 underneath, right? Typical zone coverage underneath, but they like to match outside, play like more of a man concept on the outside. They don't bring a ton of pressure. They like to bring a lot of single dogs, strong safety off the edge, nickel off the edge, to try to give presence in the run game. So they'll be aware of that. Again, this is a team, because it's a 4 down front, you should be able to screen them, but you've got to get up to that second level. And that's what a lot of these teams have had problems doing against this team. And they've been really good against the run, is getting up to the second level because of those big interior defensive linemen. You can't get through that and work up to the second level. Therefore, there's a free runner in the hole.
So because Cleveland statistically has been so good in the middle of their defensive line, and that's where the Patriots love to run it. I mean, it's strength versus strength. Are you looking to throw over the top with screens? Are you looking to try and establish stuff on the outside, on the perimeter with screens? Who's their screen guy? I mean, I don't want to go back into that, because they don't have, Kendrick Bourne might be your screen guy, but he's not that. Edelman or Aguilar. Anyway, is that the way to exploit the Browns defense, is screens over the top?
Yeah, well, with the screen games, it's going to come down to, you get off a play action, move that defense, right, and move the pocket, and then therefore throw back. We used to have one called 335 or 535 max. screen left to H, right? You're faking play action, the waggle action, like your play action passing. You're going to manipulate the coverage, especially at the second level, get them to drop in, and then you're going to get the ball to the back. So it's just different types of ways. You've got the wide receiver screens, but at the same time, there are going to be a lot of one-on-one opportunities on the outside, and you've got to take advantage of their aggressiveness up front, because look, this is a team that's going to pin their ears back in any type of passing situation and come after you. And then what the Bengals were able to have some success with, particularly early in the game, was getting to the edge with the crack tosses, right? You crack down on the defensive end, you pull that offensive tackle around, he hits the first thing that shows, and now you're out to the edge. So there's situations like that where I think that they can get to the edge. And if you watch that Bengals game, they had a lot of success with that, getting to the outside of the formation, not always having to grind it in the interior part of that defense.
And they sucked at getting to the edge early in the year, Phil. So that's going to go. Yeah,
they did. But you know what was interesting last week was they brought the crack toss back a little bit.
Crack toss is back.
They brought it back. They brought it back. I was surprised they did. I thought that might be one of those things that Josh McDaniels is talking about. You know, there are just some things that we're not very good at. We're going to have to throw those out after, 5-6 weeks of the season. But to score that Hunter Henry touchdown, or no, I think it was actually the Damian Harris goal line touchdown to get him down there right by the goal line, crack toss to Ramondre Stevenson out of 22 personnel. So they can do it if they need to. And maybe they see that from the Bengals last week and they decide to do it. I just find it interesting. I love hearing Cassel talk scheme, because when I hear quarters, I think too high, and usually too high defenses aren't all
too
that
high
strong
against at the back.
Two high safeties at the back.
For people who aren't keeping up. Two guys way back.
That means generally you have one fewer body in the box, which means generally you're a little weaker against the run. And yet the Browns are second in football in yards per carry allowed at 3.5. I think it probably just speaks to the speed they have at the second level, but also just the strength of their front to be a four-man front and play the run the way they do when they have two safeties back there a lot of the time. That's really impressive. They just have some good physical talent, it seems like, on that side.
Matt, how much does availability impact the way a team game plans? Both the Patriots and Browns have significant injuries that they're dealing with. Myles Garrett missed practice. He's going to be out there, I'm sure. Nick Chubb's got COVID, may not be. Jarvis Landry missed practice. Takk McKinley, Malik Jackson, all missing practice for Cleveland. Of course, the Patriots have a litany of injuries themselves. Do you still play, okay, we do what we do, or do you start to say, okay, well, if we don't have this guy, then we're going to do this? Right. How do your experience?
Right. You've got to adjust your game plan. Now, in terms of the Nick Chubb, you want him out there, right? But you got a guy like Ernest Johnson, I believe, is their only guy that's capable of possibly playing right now, unless Nick Chubb's passes protocol. But Bill Callahan, their often O-line coach, is one of the best in the game. And so it doesn't matter who's back there. They'll be able to scheme stuff and run the ball and have success running the ball, just because, like Phil just talked about, they've dedicated and spent money on the interior part of that offensive line. They've got big physical tight ends that they can run the ball, and that's who they are. So it's not going to impact how they call the game much. Now, it will if you're talking about from a defensive standpoint and you don't have Myles Garrett out there. Well, you're going to circle that on your call sheet and say, if he's not playing, well, now we have more ability to maybe do more drop back pass. We can maybe try to get the ball down the field, and it might change how you attack this defense because you don't have the game wrecker out there. And so that's a big difference when you have a guy that can change the complexity of the game just based on his raw ability and getting after the passer, like a guy, Myles Garrett, who has 12 sacks on the season. That's a different animal than you're talking about a running back position who he's a game changer as well. Nick Chubb is, but you can also plug another guy in and still have success and run your offense.
All right. Last part that I want to get to right up here at the front as we talk Cleveland is Baker Mayfield. How good is he? Would you rather have Baker Mayfield for the next 7 years than Mac Jones? Phil, first.
For me, there's no doubt in my mind that I'd rather have Mac Jones. And it's almost more because there's still ceiling there that we don't know about. How high is it? How high does it go with Mac Jones? With Baker Mayfield, there is a backlog of experience, and there is plenty in terms of sample size for us to be able to say he's a good, not great quarterback.
But he's good.
I think it's the reason the Browns haven't paid him yet. I think he's pretty good. I think he does some things well. I think he limits them in some ways as well. To me, he does not want to throw it outside the numbers. He wants to work the middle of the field. They're a great screen team. They throw a lot of screens. That might be in part based on the fact that their receiving group isn't all that good, which is weird to say because they just got rid of probably their most talented guy, but it's not a good receiving group in terms of the talent there. But Matt, I look at it and I say, why do they have to be so reliant on screens? And why is everything over the middle of the field? And they've got this great offensive line. He should be protected. It feels like they do a lot of the things that the Patriots do to protect Mac Jones because he's not being protected, right? Screen game, quick game, get it out of your hands. Let your playmakers do work with the ball after the catch. To me, if you can get Baker Mayfield down on the scoreboard and put him in a situation where he has to just drop back, pass, read it 1 to 2 to 3, and make plays down the field, I'm not confident that he's great in those situations. I think it's part of the reason the Browns haven't paid him yet. If they felt better about him, he'd have a big deal by now, and he doesn't.
Well, I also think, you've got to look at his situation, right? He had different offensive coordinators for the first, 3 years in the league. And now he's in his second year, finally, with some consistency with Kevin Stefanski. He had a great year last year. And the way that this offensive structure is set up, look, they live in 12 personnel. There are a lot of heavy personnel, 13 sets. And so that's 3 tight ends, 1 wide receiver. So they live and die with the run game. And everything that they do offensively comes off of that run game. So they've become a great screen team. And why not, right? If you can run the ball the way you do, and even a lot of the screens go to the tight ends, they're easy plays. They like to get an empty formation. He's been outstanding in the quick game. He's very accurate. He had some big plays last week, particularly in the first quarter. He hit a post route, dead on the run. I think it was Donovan Peoples-Jones down the middle of the field. So they're set up for play action. They're set up for screens. They do some quick game, but they're not a team that spreads you out and just wants to live in 11 personnel and throw the ball. That's just not their general philosophy. That's not what Kevin Stefanski wants to do. So when you're critiquing him, I don't think it's so much based on him as it is the scheme itself, that this is who we are. This is how we want to play the game. But again, when you get in the 2-minute situations too, that's another way that you evaluate quarterbacks and how they perform. And because probably they don't do it as much, they're probably not as good as some of the other teams.
That's a good point. They don't live in that world all that often. So, but there are moments where you're going to be, especially when you're down, right?
Right.
You've got to have 3 receivers on the field. The Patriots don't want to live in that world either, but they're in 11 personnel a fair amount this year because they're down on the scoreboard and they feel like they've got to throw it. So how does he fare in those situations? So Matt, where do you put him? We've talked to you a lot about quarterback rankings this year. Where is he for you?
I mean, he's a solid quarterback in this league, and that's just my general opinion about him. I mean, watching him play, I think he plays tough. I believe he's accurate. Now, every quarterback, if you watch him and you evaluate him throughout the course of a season, look, they're going to make those bonehead throws or bonehead plays and force it in particular situations. But it's not enough to say he's in a Sam Darnold realm of just inconsistent quarterback play. I think he's a consistent quarterback that they play in a very difficult division, and he made tremendous strides last year in what he was able to accomplish, what that team was able to accomplish. And now for him, it's just being consistent and going out there week in and week out and playing well, and I just think he's a solid quarterback, and he's a mid-tier quarterback, but at the same time, he's a guy that you'd feel good about going out on Sundays and performing with.
He's
right in the middle.
He's a not going to hurt you guy. He's like a not going to hurt you guy, which is fine. That's excellent. If you have a Myles Garrett and a Jadeveon Clowney and you have a Nick Chubb, that's great. That's great. To me, what's interesting is probably stuck in the back of Patriots fans' minds is the Freddie Kitchens version of Baker Mayfield, who wandered into Foxborough as a rookie. Phil, was he a rookie?
Freddie Kitchens. He
no. Was Baker Mayfield a rookie when they came in here?
Yeah, I don't know.
He might have been his second year.
Yeah,
no idea.
I think he had a handoff intercepted in that game. It was not good. But he's better now than he was. All right. We're going to come back in just a second with King in his castle. The King in his castle.
King of the castle.
The Brian Burns thing this week has gotten me so flat-footed. Yeah. Here is Brian Burns. Look, he's already shaking his head. I'm so excited about this. Brian Burns, Carolina Panthers defender. Really good player. Strip sacked Mac Jones last week. After he strip sacked Mac Jones tried to divert Brian Burns from giving pursuit. He said he thought he might have had the ball. I think that's bull. But in doing that, Brian Burns got his ankle twisted and his feelings hurt. Here's Brian Burns from Wednesday still talking about it.
It would be nice to have an apology, Mac. It would be nice to have an apology, but I mean, it's not going to happen. And, however the NFL handles it, it's on them. I would just like to play them again. And I wish all my fellow DN brothers happy hunting. And that's all.
All right, Mac, go off, King.
I mean, what are we doing, Brian Burns? I mean, I respect him as a player. I think he's an outstanding guy, but it's a Wednesday. Okay. You're coming off a significant loss in which you got dominated. And now you're sitting here on Wednesday, putting out a rallying cry and saying, hey, I want all my defensive ends, all my brothers in the league to go out there and attack Mac Jones for one single play, in which you came back in the game. It didn't take you out of the game for permanent reasons. And I'm just sitting there going, is this necessary? I mean, I can understand what Mac Jones was thinking. He got strip sacked. He doesn't know where the ball is. Maybe Brian Burns does have the ball. I'm going to grab him and think maybe I'm going to make a game, a tackle that doesn't allow him to go take the ball back. That's just football, and people get banged up all the time in football. I don't think it's his intent. If you look at Mac Jones, the type of person he is, the history that he's had playing in Alabama, he's never been one of those guys that's going to try to purposely hurt somebody. It just was an incident in the game that took place. Get over it, move on, and let's go. What are we talking about on a Wednesday?
It's so benign too. It's not like he karate kicked the side of his knee. It's not like he karate
the
chopped
sideline and tackled him.
He pulled his lower leg. If he could have gotten to his calf, he would have pulled that. He wasn't twisting his ankle. Look, if you intend to injure, that's one thing. But I can't imagine, and I said this a bunch of times, Matt, if you've been strip sacked and the ball is most likely on the ground, you have to make yourself useful, don't you? By somehow, if you're a quarterback coach and you're just laying there flopping and you see your quarterback flopping around afterwards, not doing anything, wouldn't you say, can you make yourself useful and try and make sure other players don't get to the ball? Wouldn't that be the case?
It's always the case, even on interceptions and during practice, you have to finish the play. The quarterback's the guy that has to hustle. He can't stand there. And the coaches hate that. They scream at you during practice, particularly on an interception in practice, because it's a way to practice. Hey, this is what we've got to do. This is how we've got to react. Same thing. You don't get strip sacked in practice, but it's your job. You're disoriented. You've got hit. You knocked on the ground. The ball's out. And all you think is we've got to somehow get that ball possession back. And so whatever means necessary. And that's why you see in those piles and it gets nasty and ugly and people are pinching and screaming and yelling and scratching, clawing to get the ball back. Well, it's because you're trying to fight for your lifeblood of the offense and get the ball back. And in that circumstance, I can understand. Look, he's on his back. He doesn't understand. He maybe thinks Brian Burns has the ball. Okay. He grabbed his ankle and it's unfortunate that somebody gets hurt. You never want to see somebody get hurt. But again, I don't think it was intentional. It wasn't like he came off and chop blocked him on a reverse or something like that and took out the guy's leg. And he was able to come back in the game.
On the face of it, too, every single down, quarterbacks, when they're throwing, are otherwise occupied. And they're 220 pounds. And their eyes are down the field. And they're virtually unprotected from on-rushing 275 to 300-pound guys who can run 4.4s and are just dying to eviscerate them.
Right.
So to me, to whine about an ankle grab is so kind of embarrassing. These guys they'll knock your spleen into the 18th row if they can, right out through your mouth.
You're not allowed to do that anymore, though. I will say, listen, I know we got a quarterback on the show here. Those guys are pretty well protected. You are pretty well protected. There's a reason Tom Brady can play till he's 50. There's a reason Aaron Rodgers is going to do the same thing. They're pretty. I'm just, we might have some defensive players somewhere in the world that are watching this. I think Burns' contention is that's outside the game. That was something that happened that's outside what typically happens in a football game. I don't mind him being a little bit upset about it. It's the timing of it. It's so late. It's the whiny nature of being at the podium and talking about it for 6-7 minutes. It's too much. It's too much, Brian Burns. Move on.
We're moving on.
We're moving on too. And we're moving directly into a king in his castle. The king in his castle. Matt Cassel, this is what everybody's been looking forward to. The segment where you take over and give us your insights on things that you've experienced. Phil, I don't know if you saw James Harrison's A Football Life, but I watched it last week, and all of a sudden they're showing how terrifying James Harrison can be, and they're showing him just screaming. Apparently it was in 2008. And our friend Matt Cassel, I'm coming for you! And he had just a dominant performance at Gillette Stadium that day. Mm-hmm. That's got to be one of the most harassed you've been by an individual player. He was at the height of his powers then.
Yes,
you remember that game?
Yes, I remember. And he got around the edge and hit me in the back and screaming at me the entire time. And every time I came to the line of scrimmage, he's screaming at me. And I'm like, gosh, Thank God this is good parameters of a football game, because if I was anywhere else, I would be sucking my thumb going, please stop. No. Most weeks you go out in the NFL and you get there, and the day one, you go up and you put on the defensive scouting report and you look at particularly the defensive line. How is that going to impact the game, particularly in the pass game? And you're like, dude, I need to get the ball. I mean, guys like Freeney and then Jason Taylor when I was younger. And then as you get like the Khalil Macks of the world, you're always like, oh man, I hope he's not a free runner this week. But then you've got the interior linemen like the Fletcher Cox of the world, the Aaron Donalds more recently. I mean, Akeem Hicks was always a beast in Chicago. And so Geno Atkins for Cincinnati, you always have these guys that you're just like intimidated by, and you know that they're men among boys. I guess, is that a good phrase to put it? And
That's fine. That's fair. Yeah.
Of course.
But again, it's not my job to block them, but at the same time, you're always aware of them, and you know that they're coming after you and they're trying to intimidate you and they're trying to hit you every chance they get.
Would Christian Barmore fall into that category now, do you think? Do the Patriots have one of those guys?
Judon, maybe.
I mean, Judon is a guy, and you know what, Judon, I think he's comparable to a guy like Suggs. You know, when Suggs was at the height of his career, he was a guy that was a dominant edge rusher. He would line up at the end and then could get after you, not only in the run game, but he was big, physical, get after you in the pass game as well. So, I mean, there's guys up and down this league, and that's why that defensive end position and usually those interior linemen, they get paid so much money, because if they can wreak havoc, particularly in the interior part or the outside of the pocket, I mean, it makes it for a tough time for the quarterback position.
Hightower, Seymour, and Wilfork would make me uneasy, Matt.
Oh, Seymour was, I played against him when I went to the Chiefs. I played against Seymour, and before the game, he goes, well, what's up, dog? You know, like, what's up, buddy? How's it going? Of course, during the game, he picks me up and body slams me and got a 15-yarder. Then we played in the Raiders later on that year, I believe it was. Same thing. Picked up, body slam, 15-yarder. I'm like, Seymour, I know I said some things to you during the Patriots when I was there, and I didn't mean it. Will you stop picking me up and body slamming me and trying to hurt me? I mean, but he was one of those, you know, it's the same thing with a guy like Troy Polamalu in the secondary. He's the nicest man you've ever met when it's just us talking and all that stuff. He was my roommate in college, but as soon as he gets on the field, it's like you don't even know who he is. He sacked me one time, and I think it was that same game. He hit me, knocked me down, and I was like, are you going to help me up? And he just turned around and walked away. I was like, Troy, are you serious? I mean, we were roommates in college. You're not even going to pick me up? And then I was seeing him back there crossing himself. I'm like, that is so unchristian of you. That's so messed up.
Was he a fun roommate? I mean, the sweetest guy in the world.
Great guy, great sense of humor, funny. You know, I could not say a bad thing about Troy Polamalu. Like, what you see is what you get. He's humble, and he's a guy that respects everyone. And it's just the nature of, I think, his culture, how he grew up. But at the same time, from a person standpoint, there's not many people that you can compare to Troy Polamalu.
How was his hair back then?
Yeah.
Was it because it's
Incredible.
sponsored? It's sponsored now, you know, Head and Shoulders. I mean, the guy, it's just flowing all over your television screen.
Always
it was
jealous.
incredible, even back then.
Always jealous, knowing that he was going to have hair and, you know, forever. And I was losing mine probably starting in college. And I was like, God, mine's already thinning. Can I borrow some of yours? I don't know. Yeah. Great hair.
Now,
Always great hair.
So what kind of a room was it? Because, like, you know,
We had a house. House. So
you had a bunch of roommates.
It was myself, Carson Palmer, Troy Polamalu, Kerry Colbert, who was a wide receiver. Grant Maddowes was there. Malifo McKenzie, Lenny Vandermeen. So we had guys, and all those guys, Norm Katnick, we had like a house that was awesome. 1013, baby. 1013 right by USC. And we just kind of bunked up in different rooms. Everybody kind of had a roommate, and it was a great house though. A lot of fun. All those guys, I think at one point or another, played in the NFL.
Before we get on to the last question, I want to present to you in King and his Castle.
Mm-hmm.
Who was the scariest defender you dealt with?
The scariest defender. Gosh, you know what? I always was one of those guys that was always intimidated by Ray Lewis. He talked the entire game, but he also, the way that he played and his big eyes and how he'd come up to line of scrimmage and all that stuff, he was just an intimidating figure, and he had this aura about himself, the way he ran that defense, the history behind that defense and how they would just dominate people. When you saw him in the middle of the field, you're like, man, you're playing up against Ray Lewis, and he was always scary to me. I was just like, gosh, this guy's scary.
Just knowing from your personality, it seems as if when you feel, from clips that we've seen and the way you compete, when you feel as if there's a twinge of unease, you ratchet yourself up. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you
You
have
go
to
at you seem like you go at people.
Yeah, you have to get out. And then when they start talking smack to you, if you sit there and you just take the hit and you get up and you're kind of mopey, then it just adds more to it, right? They're just going to start piling on, scream at you more. But the fun part and the fun interaction in the NFL that a lot of people don't see is when you do take a hit and you get tackled by those guys that you respect, and then you give it back and there's this little back and forth that you have. That's part of competing too. And I always like that, the banter that took place. And I'd say just the most obnoxious things to these guys. And I can't repeat those right now, but at the same time, they'd be like, this guy's crazy. What's he doing?
Give me a censored one.
Yeah, you have to give us something, because Andrew Luck used to be the guy who would say, like, he would compliment them after he took a hit. Yeah, that was
I wasn't really a compliment guy. I was more like, dude, that didn't hurt at all, you big whatever I would call him. And then I would start saying, you better bring more than that and this, and then that would just rile him up and get him pissed off. And I was like, yes, that's great. I love it.
Yeah, smart. Yeah, really good job by you.
The lineman didn't like that though. The lineman were like, Cassel, you just shut up. I was like, good point. Good point. You have to block him. I don't.
Last portion, the king in his castle. King in his castle. Tony Curran. You can tell the other night with Cassius Marsh in the Monday Night Football game that he was absolutely dying to inject himself into his football game. There was an ownership feeling among the referees, I think. So when he watched Cassius Marsh exhibit, first a back kick and then wander over to the sideline, he was dying to throw, but he didn't have a reason to. And then here's my theory. As Cassius Marsh passed him, he said, I don't have enough evidence yet. How about I pretend that I got bumped by Cassius Marsh? I'm going to shoot my saggy ass back into him, draw the contact, and then I'll throw the flag.
Throw the flag.
So first, what are your impressions on the Tony Curran interaction? And do officials have their own personalities and ways of adjudicating games?
Oh, they absolutely have their own personalities. And you know what? They're all pretty much similar. Before the game, they come up, they shake your hand, particularly the quarterbacks, the starting quarterbacks say, I'm going to protect you. Is there anything that you have any concerns about, this, that, and the other? But throughout the game, you can tell some guy, and we actually, as a team, as an offense, go through how this crew likes to call games. They like to call a lot of holding calls. These guys will let you play. They throw more penalties in the secondary than any other officiating crew in the league. So they all have their different personalities and also the way that they call the game. And then the head ref, they definitely have their own personalities and how they go about it as well. And you definitely have those interactions when you're competing and you're out there and you're in bullets are flying. There's a lot of screaming that takes place at referees at times, and particularly at the quarterback position when you're yelling at them about a pass interference, and a lot of times it's not even their call. You're yelling at the wrong ref, and then sometimes you'll see like a call and you'll be like, "What is going on right here?" And again, the yelling, the screaming. One time I was yelling at a ref, and I forget his name right now. I was in Seattle. They had 12 men on the field. I'm going, they've got 12 men on the field. Throw the flag. Well, little did I know I had to snap the ball in order to get the 12 men on the field. And then, so they call timeout and they run the guy off. I'm like, what is going on? He's like, Cassel, you have to snap the ball. I'm like, I'm so sorry for yelling at you right now. Please forgive me. Don't hold that against me for the rest of the game, because I was screaming at him, just letting him have it. And he's like, Cassel, you've got to snap the ball in order for them to get 12 men on the field for a penalty. And I was like, I need to study my rule book a little bit better. But it's usually you don't try to let them impact the game too much. And at the same time, they can impact the game with certain calls. But now with the reviews and all that stuff, it's probably a lot less than what it used to be.
I think offensively, it's 12 in the huddle. Is that the penalty on offense?
That's exactly right. 12 in the huddle. Not on defense. You can have 12 people on the field, but unless you snap the ball, it's not a penalty.
Cassel, come on. Come on.
What are we doing here?
Do we know the rules?
Do we figure out what the hell you're yelling at him for?
Tony Curran. For Tony Curran, I mean, is he one of those kind of like get off my lawn types? Because that's what it felt like.
That's what it felt like to me too. I mean, I've had good experience with them, but at the same time, anytime somebody accidentally bumps you running off the field and you throw the flag, I was just like, really, guy? Like,
he initiated it though.
I know he moved his butt back. I was like, what is going on right now? I mean, that'll be a big discussion. The league office is going to come down and be like, what are we doing here? This is bad. Like
to the officials.
Right,
officially, their party line right now is, yeah, we didn't see any ass bump.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but it's going to be a big discussion point. Like, what are we doing here? It's not about you. It's about the players. And you do a great job. If you're if you're not seen and really just heard when they call a penalty, that's the best thing that we can do. But when you bring attention to yourself in that manner, it's always bad for the officials.
Reminded me of the umpires who ring somebody up on a called strike 3 and then watch them go back to the dugout just looking for them to bitch so they can run them. That's what it reminded me of.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're gonna put a cork in this one. Hope everybody enjoyed it. Phil, Matt, Skull Crusher, John Henry, thanks for all your work.